Okay, welcome everyone to our May Noontime Knowledge. My name is Julie O'Mahony, and I am the chair of the Communications Subcommittee of the Facilities and Services Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'd like to introduce to you our May Noontime Knowledge speaker, James Loomis. James is in his second year working as an access specialist with the Disability Resources and Educational Services. He received his master's in education from the University of Illinois in 2019 and then started working in local schools. Most of that time was spent at Circle Academy, which is a part of Cunningham Children's Home in Urbana. While there, James helped students with disabilities transition to college and find careers. Switching to work with DRES was a natural extension of this work. James says that he has always appreciated working with the University of Illinois. Welcome, James. I will turn it all over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. It's a privilege to get to speak with you all today. I'm very excited to talk to you a little bit about DRES and what we do here for students at the University of Illinois. Feel free to stick around a little bit later on. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them or find answers and get back to you. I do want to just give a quick disclaimer that it's, as mentioned, May 2026, and that regulations do change. So if you're finding this presentation a little bit later on, please feel free to reach out to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date information when it comes to accommodations with students with disabilities. Okay then. So let me just quickly share my screen and we can get started with our presentation. Okay. So, fun fact about DRES. DRES is actually the oldest post-secondary disability support program in the world. We started back in the 1940s at the conclusion of World War II to support veterans of the conflict. And since then, departments like DRES have been federally mandated. So we provide academic adjustments and services and supports to Illinois students with disabilities. There is a separate department, the Office for Access and Equity, which helps staff members with accommodations, but I'd be happy to help you with any information about them if you have questions about that later. And so we maintain confidential medical documentation and determine reasonable accommodations with the goal of providing equal access for students. This is a little bit different from the requirements and regulations that you'll see at the elementary school and high school level, where accommodations are given until a student succeeds. Once a student reaches college, the requirement is simply that they get an equal access. So a good example of this might be if there's a student who's blind, they need access to the classroom materials. So we have an entire department set up to help provide appropriate formats so students can access their materials. But that doesn't mean that we're then going to set up, separate individual one-on-one meetings with the student and the TA or instructor or other additional supports on top of that. Our mandate is to provide equal access, though we're certainly happy to help discuss other supports as well, as there are a lot of resources available at the university. So, types of disabilities. There really isn't any sort of restriction. So there are physical or mobility disabilities, systemic disabilities, learning disabilities, psychological, brain injuries, ADHD, autism, low vision and blindness, deaf and hard of hearing, speech. And we even help students with temporary injuries because we actually have our own busing system. So those buses are primarily for students with physical or mobility disabilities, but can be used for any other disability. Or let's say if a student breaks their leg and now is having trouble going to a class, we'll help with those temporary injuries as well. Interesting fact, and I do believe this number has increased for DRES, that we're over 5,000, and I think actually pretty close to 6,000 students registered as students with disabilities in undergrad and grad and professional programs. But the fun fact, from my perspective at least, is that 89% of the students registered with DRES have non-visible disabilities. So you might not be able to tell just looking at a student whether or not they're registered with DRES. Obviously we have amazing teams associated with DRES in terms of wheelchair basketball and racing. So you'll see them all over campus. But a lot of our students actually might not be able to tell. And the largest growth we've actually seen has been students with cognitive and psychiatric disabilities. And there's a nice little pie chart there as well that kind of goes over the spread of students that we support. Um, One thing that kind of sets DRES apart from a lot of other colleges is the access specialists, such as myself, do literally specialize in different disabilities. So if you have a dietary concern or chronic illness, you would be speaking to a different specialist from someone who may be specialized in students with ADHD or psychological disabilities. It's very helpful for students. So to register at DRES, you would start by going to our website. There's an application that you can fill out there where you can provide information or medical documentation that kind of gives us sufficient information so that we can determine that whatever diagnosis you have actually rises to the level of disability. And then you would be assigned an access specialist and work with them to determine appropriate accommodations so that you have an equal access to your education. And they would also help mediate interactions with instructors to make sure that your accommodations are being correctly implemented. This process can take a day or weeks. It depends how quickly we get the information and can go through that. And certain more complex accommodations can take even longer. That's usually something related to maybe like a clinical placement in med school. We do accommodations for those as well. And those can require a little bit more discussion with the placement area to make sure students are getting equal access to their education. So requirements can vary depending on the disability. Certain disabilities that are visible, you won't necessarily need to say, like, I'm a wheelchair user, because we can see that you are, in fact, in a wheelchair. So you might not need a strict documentation of that versus a different type of disability. We do use IEPs and 504 plans, but those don't necessarily always have all the information that we're going to need. So we often request additional documentation from third parties, usually a primary care physician or a counselor, especially if we can get access to diagnostic testing. It gives us a good idea of what the functional impact of a student's diagnosis is. Um, and we're just trying to use that information to determine what appropriate accommodations are. A good example of this is students on the spectrum for autism. You know, autism is a very broad diagnosis, and so accommodations for one student might not be appropriate for another student with autism. So it's always good to have this kind of conversation and documentation to determine what's appropriate. Once you are registered with DRES, we have, I would categorize it somewhat broadly into two different areas of services. The first are general supports, and the other are more individualized accommodations. For general supports, we have things like priority registration or academic underloads, which are generally only for undergraduate students. But we also have a testing accommodations center. We have text conversion. We have counseling available, academic coaching, assistive technology, a whole array of supports that are available for students to help provide equal access to their education. Um, One of the programs that we really like to push forward is academic coaching. This is focusing on executive functioning skills, so things like planning, note-taking, organization, dealing with procrastination. It's separate from tutoring. The Jeffrey Center does a great job helping students with tutoring and specific services. And then some of the graduate colleges have their own tutoring programs as well. So this is really more focused on just organization and planning. But it is also individually tailored to each student. It's not a general curriculum that we provide. We really work to interact one-on-one with students to see what exact supports they need. It is fairly popular, so sometimes students can be put on a wait list, but there is a second option, which is drop-in coaching. And as far as I know, that has never had any issue with availability. So it's actually fairly easy to get out of the wait list. The only real difference would be you might not meet with the same coach every week, but we're very happy to try and set you up with someone if this is an appropriate support. And there's no charge or session cap, though in some cases, if you repeatedly no-show, there could be a fine associated with that if you're not communicating with your coach, simply because there is such a demand for this service that we have a wait list. And then another popular support is mental health counseling. Now, the University of Illinois has a lot of counseling options available. There's the Counseling Center, there's McKinley Health Center, which has its own counseling program, and then a lot of colleges and departments have their own embedded therapists and counselors as well. So DRES also provides counseling. All of these options are free for full-time students. It's generally a 50-minute session on a weekly basis. And the main difference with DRES counseling is simply that we focus on more disability-related issues, things like anxiety or depression. And aside from the one-on-one sessions that are 50 minutes, we also have support groups, and these change every semester based on student interest, simply because you can't have a support group without a group. So if not enough students are interested in one particular offer, then we might come up with something else, or often we'll have students come up with their own support groups that will then help put in place as well. Um, one thing though that I do like to emphasize is, because mental health counseling is also popular at DRES, if you do get put on a wait list for that, there are a lot of options that I previously mentioned on campus as well, such as the Counseling Center or McKinley. So we're very committed to finding you support. If this is something that you need, please let us know. Um, Other supports you'll see, we have our own career services department specifically for students with disabilities, which I think is great when it comes to, looking for, okay, you have accommodations here in college. What do those accommodations look like in the workplace? We do have people who specialize this and can help you kind of prepare for maybe internships, clinical placements, or just your career at large. So you can have consultations, there are career coaching sessions. They can help with resumes, cover letters, personal statements, online business profiles like a LinkedIn. And they're just a wonderful program that I highly recommend. And I really appreciate their specialization in terms of helping students with disabilities. And then one other program that we have here that actually kind of started, at least this meeting for me to come present today, is Accessible Media Services, AMS. For students who need text conversion or closed captioning, audio descriptions, or other assistive technology, we have our own little program as a part of DRES that assists with that, which is actually in-house. So we have a whole bunch of student workers and full-time staff who will help with the transcription and synchronizing all the elements from these different academic resources to make sure that students have equal access. And it really is quite diverse, the amount of supports they can provide. So I really appreciate them. I think these last couple pages are kind of more of a summary of things we've already discussed, or at least I've mentioned. Accommodations in college can't fundamentally alter a course, so that is one thing to consider when discussing accommodations with your access specialist. And we can't pre-approve you before a student is registered. This is very much an interactive process where you work with your access specialist to determine what accommodations would be appropriate and how to actually implement them and put them in place. And these can be modified later, but they are not technically retroactive. So the end of the process is the access specialist will give the student who's been registered a letter. Depending on their program, that might go to an instructor or to a more general email or Dropbox. And the accommodations are put in place once that has been transmitted to the appropriate instructor or department. But the department does not need to go back retroactively and provide accommodations for events that have already occurred before the letter was submitted. However, you can discuss it. They're not mandated to do that, but often instructors can consider that if it seems like a reasonable extension of the letter. They're just not required to. So There are some graduation requirements, oddly enough, that DRES can help with. We see this most frequently with foreign language and math courses, where some students, due to their disability, may really struggle simply to meet those requirements in order to graduate. And so we can petition colleges and programs to modify those requirements to better enable students to graduate. It is a process, but usually happens, at least for me personally, once or twice a year, where we'll just go through that and see what we can do to help a student with that graduation requirement. And many students actually don't know this is even possible, which is why I really like to talk about it, because if they don't know that they can do this, then they'll never take advantage of this resource, which I think is very helpful for a lot of students. Um, Things that we like to just reinforce is simply the fact that all students, regardless of disability, are expected to meet the same requirements for their classes, and that you have to submit an application in order to request accommodations. And we're here to help with the entire process. So please reach out if you ever have any questions or concerns related to disability-related accommodations. And that is the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing there and open things up to see if anyone has any questions.
James, you said that, I mean, most of your presentation was about the students, but you said that there was also things that could be done for faculty and staff.
Sure, yes. So that's the Office for Access and Equity. And so they have a very similar application process. And you can just go to their website. And if you have questions, certainly you can ask me about it and I can find more information. But they would actually have the most up-to-date information. We actually met with them, I think, last month just to go over our own little meeting similar to this one to make sure we're being consistent. But yes, they help with staff accommodations here at the university. So similar things could be related to a workplace or office. Maybe a person needs a different type of desk. Maybe they need um, some sort of accessible media transcription. But yeah, it's the Office for Access and Equity, OAE. And that's also where our ADA coordinator is a part of that department as well. Kiara Drake, wonderful person. If there are ever any concerns or conflict or confusion related to accommodations, either for students or staff, she is a wonderful resource and I do highly recommend her. Anyone else with a question?
And feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to speak on this recording.
So there are the general websites, and I'll put them in the chat. I'll pull up a moment. Here is just the DRES website right here. And I'll pull up OAE as well for staff. In terms of just general resources or information, there's not one that comes immediately to mind. Here's the link for, wait, sorry, it's DRES twice. Um, Here we are. So those are the more general resources for the University of Illinois. Um, it can really depend on the state. And I mean, Illinois just modified some of the regulations related to accommodations just this year. So that's had us, we've had to kind of switch some of our expectations to meet those changes. And that's going to be true of any university, you know, in the United States. Um, so it can really depend if they're in Illinois in another state. And then, in all honesty, the best resource is going to be any individual program that you're working for, either as a student, as an employee, or applying to as a student. Because they're going to have a better idea of what the processes that you're going to have to go through are. So we have our online application process.
Had samosas and chai.
Okay, that must be what I saw then. It smells good.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's from
Okay. Um, so sorry for the interruption there. Now we're happy to help. I mean, you can set up a meeting with an access specialist to kind of discuss more one-on-one what information we can share for individual concerns. Um, but I don't know if there's a good general resource, simply because it can really be very specific to the state and the university you're applying to. Um, yeah. I'm sorry if I can't give anything more specific than that. University of Illinois has resources that other universities might not necessarily have. We have our own busing network. We have Beckwith, which is a dorm for students with primarily mobility disabilities. And so they have things like showers that can accommodate wheelchairs or harnesses that hang from the ceiling. And I can't speak to other universities having such resources generally. So it can be very specific. I'm sorry if that's not as helpful as I might have liked. Any other questions or follow-ups?
So you just mentioned that states have different rules and regulations, and presumably federally there are also different ones. Do those ever come into conflict, or are they generally, do you know what, like where, I mean, obviously different states' rules would only apply in those states, but
Yeah.
federal rules, do they ever come over the top and go, no, now you have to do it this way, or generally are the states just allowed to make their own within the parameters of whatever the
No, that's a very good question. The answer is both. So we did have some recent changes to Title II, which has been um, applied to every state, but it changes how we basically offer electronic resources and information to students with disabilities. And so that has been something we've had to adapt to as more recently, versus the Illinois specific regulatory changes that apply only to our state. And that was more related to what documentation and support students need to provide in order to register as a student with a disability. And so we've had to change some of our processes to adapt to that. But both can change and impact. It's usually not necessarily a conflict between state and federal. It's more of here's a new requirement. Please make sure your institution meets it. And those directives can come from either source. Any other questions? What areas do you think will evolve in the near future? Well, a huge thing that's been impacting society lately has been the use of AI, which is impacting universities and colleges across the world in general. But it's interesting to see how that impacts disability supports as well. One of the accommodations that we allow students to use is note-taking support. There are a lot of softwares available for that. And we do have a specific software that we provide subscriptions for students who have this accommodation for free. And part of that note-taking software does include an AI, because what the software does is it allows you to record a class. Now, I talked about fundamental alterations a little bit during the slideshow. Recording class can be a little bit controversial depending on the program. The law school here at the University of Illinois and the School of Social Work have definitely had concerns about that in the past due to confidentiality. But in general, students will record a lecture and then the software will give a text transcript of the entire lecture. So if a student is struggling for a disability-related reason to take their own notes, this software kind of fills that gap so they have an equal access to notes so that they can study for their exams. At the same time, listening to a recording or, even skimming through a transcript for a class can be a lot of time to devote towards any one class. And when a student's taking multiple classes, that could be quite a few hours extra. So an extra support on top of that this software provides is the ability for AI to summarize the transcript. Now, AI is not perfect. It is sometimes prone to hallucinations when it can't find a resource or provide an answer easily. When, however, it's given a discrete block of text, like in this transcript, it's actually a lot more reliable. Obviously, I would second guess anything simply because when I'm taking a class, I want to make sure I'm getting the right information. But it is fairly useful for students who don't have the time to watch a lecture multiple times to get this kind of summary instead. Personally, I always advocate whenever a student is discussing this accommodation that students continue to try to take their own notes to the best of their ability. At least for me personally, I remember things more easily when I write them down by hand. But that's my own individual situation, and that can vary depending on the student and what type of support they need. But I would say definitely AI is something that the university and education at large is going to have to adapt to address as we move forward. Next question was, for students with physical disabilities, how are they able to address barriers to access in real time on campus by working with DRES? Can you describe how that process typically works and maybe what a unit like F&S would need to be aware of? It really depends on the disability. Housing is definitely a very specific subset of accommodations that we deal with. That is frankly fairly involved. So we do have dorms that have, Beckwith that's been specifically constructed for some physical disabilities. But I wouldn't expect F&S to have to make very many modifications to there because it was already built to meet those needs. More commonly, what you're going to see for a housing accommodation is a student requesting a single room. And there's a fairly high standard for that. But that, once again, doesn't necessarily require additional support from a unit like F&S. Where I would see F&S having more interaction would actually be an accommodation for a second refrigerator. So some students need their medication to be, kept at a certain temperature for it to remain viable. So there is an accommodation for a second refrigerator in a room. And certainly we can write a letter saying that we need to provide this accommodation, but the electricity requirements to actually have a second refrigerator in a room, that's not necessarily a trivial thing. So we might need to talk to F&S, or in some cases it would probably be housing that would talk to F&S just to make sure that the room can handle the additional load from having two refrigerators in a single room. And if everyone were to do that, that would have a huge impact. But that, I think, would be the main time F&S would be specifically involved. Other accommodations are generally for things like access to a room with air conditioning, which most dorms now have. Or access to an individual restroom or a private use restroom. And I don't think F&S would necessarily be a large part of either of those accommodations either. So yeah, I think the big one would be just making sure the electrical load is handled well for an additional refrigerator. Now, I personally specialize actually in psychological disabilities and ADHD, so I don't have as many housing accommodation requests, and those that I do have often don't require any physical modification of rooms. But I can reach out if you would like to the other specialists who might work on, say, mobility disabilities or chronic illness to see if they have any other suggestions as well, if you'd like.
James, did you were talking to me earlier about giving presentations to students. Is this part of the general tour of U of I when the students come? Do you get to speak to them and tell them what accommodations we can do?
So we show up to a lot of events, a lot of events. We do as much outreach as we can. So we are going to be there as part of just general student registration. Quad day, we show up for a lot of RSOs um, and individual colleges as well. We often have presentations for Geese and Vet Ed and College of Law, and we go to wherever we can to kind of let people know that we're here, we're available, and if they ever have any questions, they can reach out to us. Or just see us there at those events. But yes, we do as much outreach as we can because we can't help people unless they know we're here. Luckily, a lot of people do, but it certainly doesn't hurt to continually maintain that outreach so that we can be there easily accessible for students and anyone who needs us. Any other questions?
So does your outreach begin like when the kids are applying? Like are students aware of how, I mean, DRES is well known on campus, but is that something kids learn about when they get here, or does that actually drive applications because they know how integrated DRES is to the campus?
It both. I feel like I'm saying that answer too much. So we are constantly doing outreach. Certainly, the incoming students right now are a large part of what we're handling. At the moment, I think we started giving similar presentations to this on a monthly basis. I think back in April, just because everyone's coming and wanting to see what accommodations and resources are available for a student as they consider coming here. But we have presentations throughout the year for all the different departments and colleges. Now, when a student's incoming, it could very well be that they know DRES exists. Like my uncle was used DRES services when he was here at the University of Illinois back in the 70s. So obviously I knew about DRES. But for students who might not, we are there during student orientations and any tabling events that go on for individual colleges. And that's one of the primary ways we reach out to students as they're coming into the college or into the university. Any other questions?
James, do you work with the ITAL group on campus?
I do not personally, but it's ringing a bell.
That's the IT accessibility liaison team.
So I don't
'Cause-
work with them individually.
Mhm.
But let's see, that's through the Office of the Vice Chancellor. I have no doubt. Yep, so they're working with the ADA coordinator. They're working with OAE.
Okay.
Um, and just giving it a cursory look through. That's definitely something we should make sure we're coordinating with. I'm fairly confident that's already being done. It's just not something
Yeah,
that I
I
personally
think Christy might do some coordination with them, but I just
Yeah.
didn't know how much because I know you mentioned the whole the text size and the Helvetica and all that, which is, it's stuff that group looks at too, I guess, when they're developing like e-learning solutions and things. So I didn't know how closely um, you've worked with them or DRES works with them. I think, like I said, I know Christy
Yeah.
might work with them more
Yeah,
than
no, Christie would
um,
definitely be a large part of this, and this is all part of the Title II changes that I mentioned in terms
okay.
of digital accessibility. And I could definitely see Christie being a large part of that. For those who don't know, Christie works with Accessible Media Services, which is a part of DRES, and so they help with a lot of the making sure that resources are accessible for students, not just necessarily textbooks and videos, but also online resources as well. So I could definitely see her being a large part of this, or at least interacting.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. We so appreciate it. And that's a lot of information. I know I personally have used some of it, and I'm sure a lot of other people know people who will be using it.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy to get the chance to speak with you all. Please feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions. We can't help unless we know, and that's something I always tell students: the sooner you let us know that you have a concern, the sooner we can help you out with it, and we're happy to do so. Truly.
All right, great. Well, thank you
All
all
right.
for coming, and as they say in the song, we will see you in September.